Hey guys, welcome back to SUP'S Garage. On this video, I'm gonna be showing you how to replace your stator and your rectifier on your 06 to 07 GSXR 600 and 750. And the reason why we're having to do that, the battery is no longer getting any charge, and this bike is fully relying on the battery when you're riding this bike, which obviously eventually this bike dies out while you're riding it for about 15 to 30 minutes. So let's get started. All right, so we're gonna start off by removing these bolts here on both sides. Now, as you can see, mine's already missing, but basically once you remove the bolt on this side and the other side, you could easily just pull up on the seat and get it out of the way. And once you've done that, just grab this piece here and pull back slowly and it'll come right off. Yours might have some Velcro in there, so you might have to pull it off a little bit on the back. Mine doesn't have Velcro on this side, so it was a lot easier for me to remove this out of the way. And then you're gonna do the exact same thing on the other side. Like so. All right, next we gotta remove this bolt here on top of the tank. All right, next temporarily, you're gonna have something to hold the tank open where you can disconnect everything from the bottom of the gas tank. I'm gonna use my mallet like I always do, just to hold it up. All right, next you're gonna disconnect your fuel line. Now just keep in mind, when we disconnect this, you might have some pressure, so be sure you don't get any on your eyes or on yourself. You're gonna have one tab on each side. You're gonna push those tabs in, push in on the line, and then pull out. All right, next we're gonna be disconnecting the connection to the fuel pump. All you gotta do to disconnect this is push down on this tab and pull it off. And usually you have to disconnect two hoses from the bottom of the tank, which would be right here, but in this case, the hoses on this tank are already missing. So if you have those, just remember which one goes where when you put this all back together. There's also gonna be a third hose towards the bottom of your gas tank, and in my case, just like the other two, mine is already missing, but simply just pull it off and leave it on the side. All right, now we're gonna remove the mallet to put the gas tank all the way down, because we got one more last bolt to remove. The only bolt left that's holding the tank to the bike. And now at this point, we could fully remove the tank from the bike. All right, for now, we're gonna go ahead and remove these front relays and put them on the side. Disconnect the sensor here in the center, which is just gonna have a tab in the front, pull off. You're gonna disconnect this hose here. Usually it has a little clip here, but on this bike it's missing, so I just gotta pull it off. All right, next you should have a total of 11 screws all the way around the airbox. I got 2 here missing in the back and also the one in the center. So on this bike, I only gotta remove 8 of the screws. All right, so once you've loosened all those screws, now you should be able to remove the top of the airbox. Go ahead and remove this bolt here on top. All right, now we gotta go ahead and loosen the 4 bolts that are holding down the bottom of the airbox onto the throttle body. You can see one here. Here's the second one. You can't really see the third one, but it's tucked in back here. And lastly, here's the 4th one. Now you do not have to remove those bolts, you just have to loosen them enough to be able to pull up on the bottom of the airbox off the throttle bodies. And sometimes you can find it a lot easier if you disconnect the top injectors, therefore you can get those out of the way and have better access to those bolts. And to remove those, you just push down on the clip and pull off. And I find that sometimes the best thing to use is a little Allen key, as you can see here, because that's really the only thing that's gonna fit in there. All right, once you loosen those 4 bolts, there's gonna be a hose on this, so don't just pull on this all the way. You're gonna wanna disconnect that hose first, and then you could fully remove the bottom of the airbox. So as you can see here, as I'm pulling up, you can see the hose there. Simply just pull it off, and then we can finally remove the rest of the airbox out of the way. All right, next you would disconnect your stator connections, but this one has already been worked on. But basically go ahead and disconnect your stator from the rectifier, and then this other plug here that also goes to the rectifier. All right, now we can go ahead and remove the stator cover, starting off with these 3 bolts up here. And I recommend you to use some kind of container to put underneath the stator to prevent from dropping any oil on the floor. Go ahead and remove this cap. Now mine's gonna be a little bit harder to remove because there's gasket sealer on this one, but yours should just have a gasket and it should be pretty easy to remove out of the way. Now once you remove the cover, there's gonna be a washer in front of this gear, so just be sure you don't lose that. All right, next we're gonna be removing this gear here, but just be careful because there's gonna be a washer behind all this as well. What I like to use to get this out is a magnet, therefore it will just pull on everything at once. And once you pull this piece out, there's gonna be the spacer in the center, as you can see here, and there's gonna be a bearing around it, and then this piece here. Just put it all back together and put it aside for now. And as you can see, there's the washer in the back that you also have to be careful not to lose. Now we can continue on removing all the bolts, starting with the one inside here first. All right, and once you got all the bolts out, now you can simply just pull off this cover. As you can see, that gear that fell down, it just goes right here along with the spacer. You're simply just gonna put the spacer back in and put this on the side for now. All right, next we're gonna go ahead and remove the rectifier, which is held down by 2 bolts. Once you remove those 2 bolts, just pull it out. But I'm simply just gonna remove these 2 bolts before I can remove the rectifier out of the way. All right, so I got my new rectifier here, and I am going with the Ric's rectifier as well as the Ric's Stator because I haven't had any issues using these, but I'm not gonna be putting the rectifier back in its original location. I'm now gonna have it mounted inside the bottom of the airbox. Now, if you don't decide to do this, just simply bolt on the new rectifier back on the bracket and onto the bike. But the reason I like doing this, in my opinion, it extends the life on the rectifier, no longer being so close to the headers and having all that heat. So simply just remove the air filter out of the way. And I'm just gonna be making a hole in this area here, just big enough to be able to slide these connectors through it. And you can use a drill to do this as well, but in this case, I'm gonna be using this tool because to me, it makes it a lot easier. And it should sit just like this once you're done. And you do want to make sure that you're able to put the rectifier all the way against this wall here, because if you go a little further up, you're not going to be able to have enough space to put that air filter back in place. But the next thing I'm going to have to do is just drill 2 holes, because I'm going to be using the original bolts that held down the rectifier on the bracket. Therefore, this rectifier doesn't move around. And of course, for this part, I'm going to be using a drill because it's going to make this a lot easier. All right, as you can see, we got the 2 holes now. Now we can go ahead and put our bolts in and tighten the rectifier onto the airbox. Once you got the bolts in place, just simply turn it around. Now we can tighten the nuts onto the bolts. And that's pretty much it for this. This is ready to go back onto the bike. All right, so now it's time to completely remove the old stator from the stator cover. And we got a total of 4 bolts we got to remove, starting with this back bolt here. Once you remove that bolt, there's going to be a little bracket. Make sure to remove that because you're going to be using that again. Now we can go ahead and remove the 3 bolts holding down the stator. And now we can go ahead and remove the old stator. And before we put the new stator in, this would be a good time to go ahead and clean the outside of this where we don't get any dirt once the new stator's in. All right, so I got mine as clean as it's gonna get. Now I'm gonna go ahead and put the new stator in, and you're gonna be putting the stator back in with the wires facing this area here, which is where this rubber gasket's gonna sit. Once all 3 holes are lined to put the bolts back in, gonna be using a little bit of Loctite on the bolts just to be sure that they don't back out in the future. All right, now we can go ahead and put our bolts back in. All right, and just make sure those are nice and tight. Now we can go ahead and put this bracket back on, which is just designed to hold down the wires. And you might have to go ahead and put the grommet in place. Otherwise, you might have to take this bracket back off. And now we can go ahead and put this back on the bike. All right, now when putting back the stator cover, you want to make sure that this area here is clean as well. Now, if you're replacing yours with a new gasket, you don't have to use any gasket maker, but I like to use a little bit on both sides of the new gasket just to play it safe. And to make that a little easier, I'm gonna have to take out this pin just for now. And the way I'm gonna be putting gasket maker all over that is just put some on my finger a little at a time and then just smear it starting from the top. You don't have to put a very thick coating on it, just enough to cover the surface. Now, I did forget to mention, before you put any of this gasket maker, if you decide to do this as well, be sure that none of the surface, especially the bottom area, has any oil on it. Otherwise, the gasket maker won't dry up correctly. Once you've already put sealer all the way around, go ahead and put your pin back in, because you don't want to forget that. I'm gonna go ahead and put my gasket in place, and because I did use sealer, it will help it stick there and not move around. All right, now once you've done that, go ahead and put your gear back in place that sits on top. And just remember, that one on top only has this long spacer and this gear. You're gonna wanna go ahead and put the spacer in the gear and then put it in place. And just make sure that spacer is pushed back all the way back. All right, now we can finally go ahead and put the stator cover on. Now just be very careful with it. Try your best to stick it right straight in there, because once it's on there and you start moving it around, more than likely this gasket will move at that point and you're gonna risk the chance of ripping it. And like I said earlier, I'm just covering the surface with gasket maker on this side as well, just for extra security. You don't have to do this, but I do like putting a little extra right here where the grommet sits, again, just to prevent any leaking once this is done. All right, we're simply just gonna go in there straight as possible. And just keep in mind, as soon as you get close enough, this will magnetize towards the bike. So that's why I want to say do your best to go in straight, therefore you don't move around once it sits on the gasket. All right, once it's on there, you're going to want to tap it in a little bit. I recommend you use a mallet, therefore you don't damage the cover. All right, now we can go ahead and start putting back the bolts. And I'm going to start with this inside here and then go ahead and work my way around the whole cover. Okay, so I didn't tighten this all the way down, because what I like to do is make sure all these are nice and snug, and then I start back with this one, tightening this one first, and then kind of go a crisscross pattern until I get to the center again, just to be sure that the cover is bolted down evenly. All right, now I'm gonna go ahead and tighten by hand, and again, starting off with the center one. And for these, you don't have to put too much pressure because they will break. Once that I feel that it's hand tight, I just go a little bit more, and that's it. All right, now we can move on to this piece here. Now remember, there's gonna be a washer that sits in the back, which I have here. We're also gonna have to put this gear back in place, along with this bearing and the spacer that goes in it. We're gonna be putting our bearing back with the spacer into this piece. Now be careful when putting this back on, because once it goes in there, and if that washer accidentally falls in there, you're gonna have to remove the stator cover again just to get that washer. So just be patient on this part. Be sure that the spacer is flush with the front. Therefore, you have all this room here to be able to stick this back in its spot. And just a quick big tip here, guys, when putting this back, the easiest way I find doing that is using a magnet right in the center of this gear here, for nothing moves out of place while you push this in. We're gonna go in slowly, and once you feel that it's in its place, we're gonna go ahead and remove the magnet. You might have to wiggle this left and right, but you definitely will know once it sits all the way down onto the other gear. And the way you'll know that that gear is all the way back in its place is the center spacer will stick out this much. If it's still flush with this gear here, then that means that this gear here has not been put back all the way in its original spot. And you'll also know because you should have a gap here on the bottom of the gear. All right, well now we're gonna go ahead and put this piece back. Just double check that there's no cracks on the gasket that sits in place here. In my case, I'm putting a new one because mine was already ripped a little bit and I don't want to take a chance. So I'm gonna go ahead and put the new one on this one here. And once we've done that, you want to put a little bit of oil all the way around just to be sure it doesn't rip and it sits evenly in place. All right, now this piece is ready to be put back in, but don't forget the last washer that sits in front of the spacer here. For this one, I find it also easy just to tap it in a little bit and just make sure once you tap it in that it sits in evenly. And now we can go ahead and put the 3 remaining bolts on the cover. And again, just keep in mind, don't over tighten these because they will snap. All right, now that we got all that done, go ahead and route your new stator wires going towards the top of the engine like it was before. All right, now we can go ahead and start putting back our bottom of the air box back in place. And don't forget, you're gonna have this hose on the right side that we're gonna have to put back on the bottom side of this tube on the air box. And of course, make sure you remember to connect your stator and your rectifier connections underneath the air box. And just be sure before you put the airbox all the way back in its place, make sure that the 2 relays that sit on top of your airbox are sticking out, as well as this connection that goes on the sensor on top of the airbox. And now you can go ahead and tighten all 4 clamps that hold down the airbox to the throttle bodies. All right, so after tightening those 4 clamps, go ahead and reconnect the top injectors if you removed yours like I did to get access to those clamps. All right, now we can go ahead and put the air filter back on. And now just simply slide the top of the airbox on top. Go ahead and screw down all the screws that hold down the airbox to the bottom part. Okay, and once you have all those screws back on, including the one in the center, if yours still hasn't, go ahead and connect this connection back to its sensor, and then go ahead and put your relays back in place. Okay, now go ahead and put this bolt back in place that holds down the airbox to the frame. Go ahead and reconnect the hose that goes on top of the airbox. And now we can go ahead and put the gas tank back on the bike. Go ahead and place it for now because we got to tighten that back bolt first before connecting everything on the bottom of the gas tank. And you might have to wiggle the gas tank back and forth a little bit just to make sure that you got the angle correct to put the bolt in. And just like we did earlier, I'm gonna be using my mallet to hold up the tank while I connect everything back. Okay, go ahead and connect your fuel line back to the fuel pump. And just make sure that those 2 tabs are sticking out on both sides. Make sure that it's on correctly. Go ahead and connect the connection for the fuel pump back onto the harness, like so. And like I said earlier, if you still have the hoses that connect here, as well as the one back here, make sure you put those back on. Otherwise, you can go ahead and put the gas tank down. All right, now I'm gonna put the bolt back on that holds the top of the gas tank onto the frame. Now mine had a washer and the bolt. Okay, now moving on to putting the trim pieces on the side of the tank back on. Keep in mind that this tab here has to slide right here. Put it on and slide it forward, like so, and do the exact same thing for the other side. All right, so before I put the seat back on, I'm gonna start the bike, I'm gonna check the voltage, and now we should get better readings than we did in the beginning of this video. All right guys, so as you can see, those are the readings we were definitely looking for. As you saw earlier on the video, pretty much no charging on this bike. It was fully relying on the battery. But after changing that stator and rectifier, definitely took care of the problem, looking around 14 volts, which is a great number to be at when charging the system. And I do want to say sorry if I haven't been posting any videos lately, because as you can see, it's been pretty busy lately, and it's really hard to do these YouTube videos and at the same time catch up with all this chaos. But don't worry, it's not gonna stop me from making more videos to help you guys out. But like always, if you like watching what you see, hit that subscribe button for me. If you enjoy watching videos like this, don't forget to hit the like button to show your support, and feel free to share my video to grow the channel. And like always, don't forget, God loves every single one of you guys. God bless you guys, and we'll see y'all on the next video.